They say I died at 3:47 in the afternoon. I remember the exact moment, not because I felt pain, but because I felt nothing, and that nothing was so complete, so absolute, that it was louder than any sound I had ever heard in my life. My name is Princess Amira bint Faisal Al Saud. I am 28 years old. I have spent my entire life behind walls so high that most people in my own country have never seen my face. I was raised to be invisible, to be perfect, to represent something larger than myself without ever being allowed to actually be myself. And for 28 years, I accepted this. I wore the gold. I smiled at the right moments. I said nothing when I wanted to scream. But 12 hours changed everything. Not 12 hours of living, 12 hours of being dead. And what I saw in those 12 hours, what I experienced, what I was shown, what I brought back with me, it did not just shock the palace. It shattered something inside me that can never be put back together. And I need to tell you about it. Not because I want to, but because after what happened, staying silent feels like a betrayal of the only truth I have ever been allowed to see. But let me start at the beginning, because the story does not begin when my heart stopped. It begins long before that. It begins with the kind of life that looks like a fairy tale from the outside and feels like a prison from the inside. I was born in Riyadh, in a palace that has 37 bedrooms and gardens so vast you can walk for 20 minutes and still not reach the outer wall. My father is a senior prince. My mother is the daughter of a minister. I have 3 sisters and 2 brothers, and we were raised the way royal children are raised in my country, with tutors, with guards, with every material thing we could ever want, and almost no freedom to want anything beyond what was chosen for us. I learned French and English before I turned 6. I learned to play piano. I learned calligraphy, etiquette, diplomacy. I learned how to enter a room in a way that made people feel important, and how to exit in a way that made them forget I was ever there. I learned that my value was not in what I thought or what I felt, but in what I represented, the family, the legacy, the image. I learned to be perfect. And for a very long time I believed I was. My engagement was arranged when I was 24, to a man I had met twice. Both meetings were supervised. Both were formal. He was polite. He was from a good family. My father approved. My mother said I was fortunate. And so I smiled and nodded and began planning a wedding I did not want to, a man I did not know. I want to be very clear about something, because I know how this will sound to people who have never lived inside this system. I was not abused. I was not mistreated. I was given everything except the one thing that mattered. I was never asked what I wanted, not once. Not about the engagement, not about my education, not about my life. It was simply assumed that what I wanted was irrelevant compared to what was expected. And I think this is what broke something in me, long before my heart ever stopped. The slow erasure. The understanding that my thoughts, my dreams, my desires were decorative at best and dangerous at worst. But I learned to cope. I learned to smile. I learned to find small spaces of freedom inside the enormous space of captivity. I read books that no one knew I read. I wrote in journals I kept hidden. I had a friend, one friend, a cousin named Layla, who understood, who felt the same way. And in those stolen hours with her, drinking tea in the garden when no one was watching too closely, I was something close to myself. It was Layla who noticed first that something was wrong. We were sitting in my private room. It was 2 months before my wedding. The invitations had been sent. The dress was being made. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. and I had been feeling strange for weeks. Tired in a way that sleep did not fix. Short of breath when I walked upstairs, a tightness in my chest that I kept dismissing as stress. Layla looked at me that afternoon and said, "Amira, you are pale. You need to see a doctor." I told her I was fine. I told her it was just the wedding stress. I told her everything I had been telling myself for weeks. She did not believe me. And because she loved me, she told my mother. Within 2 hours, I was at the hospital, the private wing, the doctors who attend only to royal family. And within 4 hours, I was being told that I needed emergency surgery, that I had a defect in my heart I had been born with. Something that had been there my entire life. Something that had somehow never been caught in any examination. Something that had been slowly, quietly, getting worse. And that it had reached the point where waiting even a few more days might be fatal. I remember asking if we could delay until after the wedding. The doctor looked at me like I had asked if we could delay until after I was dead. They scheduled the surgery for the next morning. I barely slept that night. Not because I was afraid of dying, though I was, but because for the first time in years, I felt something break open inside me. A question I had been too afraid to ask. What if I die tomorrow? What will I have lived? And the answer was so clear, so devastating, that I could barely breathe around it. Nothing. I will have lived nothing. I will have been a symbol, a decoration, a piece moved across a board by other people's hands. But I will not have lived. I cried that night in a way I had not cried since I was a child. Not the quiet, controlled crying I had learned was acceptable. The kind of crying that is grief and rage and terror all at once. And then, at some point near dawn, I stopped. I got out of bed. I stood at the window of my room and looked out at the gardens I had walked through 10,000 times, and I made a promise to myself. If I survive this surgery, I told myself, I will start living. I do not know what that means yet, but I will find out. The surgery was supposed to take 4 hours. Something went wrong at hour 3. I do not know the medical details. I have been told since, but the language means nothing to me. What I know is this. My heart stopped, and for reasons the doctors still do not entirely understand, they could not get it started again. Not for 12 minutes, not for 30, not for an hour. My family was told to prepare. My father, who had not cried at his own father's funeral, stood in the hallway outside the surgical ward and wept. My mother prayed. And I was somewhere else entirely. I need you to understand that what I am about to describe is not a dream. It was not a hallucination caused by lack of oxygen or medication or trauma. I have spent 2 years since this happened trying to explain it to doctors, to religious scholars, to myself. And the only conclusion I have come to is this. It was real, more real than anything I have experienced before, or since. The first thing I remember is silence. Not the absence of sound, silence as a presence, a thickness, like being underwater, but without the water, without the pressure. Just a depth that surrounded me completely. And then slowly, I became aware that I was not alone. There were others there. I could not see them the way you see a person standing in front of you. But I knew they were there. Presences, essences. Some of them felt familiar in a way I cannot explain. Like meeting someone you have known your entire life but have never met. And some of them felt ancient. Old in a way that has nothing to do with time as we understand it. I tried to speak. I tried to ask where I was, but I had no mouth, no body. I was awareness without form, and somehow, without words, I understood that this was intentional, that whatever this place was, it did not require bodies, did not require form, only the truth of what you actually were beneath all the things you had been taught to be. And then I saw it, not with eyes, with something deeper than sight. I saw my life, not as a memory, as a living thing, spread out in front of me like a fabric, and I could see every thread, every moment, every choice, every word I had spoken or failed to speak, every time I had made myself smaller to fit into a space someone else had designed for me, every time I had swallowed my own voice because speaking felt too dangerous. I saw the little girl I had been, bright and curious and full of questions, and I saw the exact moments when that brightness had been dimmed, not through cruelty, through expectation, through the slow, patient, relentless pressure to become something acceptable, rather than something true. I saw my engagement. I saw my fiancé, not as he appeared to others, but as he actually was. And I saw, with a clarity that was almost unbearable, that he did not love me, that he did not know me, that to him I was exactly what I had been taught to be, a symbol, a useful alliance, a beautiful object to place in his home. And I saw something else. I saw that if I went back, if my heart started again, if I survived, and I went through with that marriage, I would live another 60 years and die without ever knowing what it felt like to be loved for who I actually was, instead of what I represented. This knowledge did not come as words. It came as feeling, as certainty. The kind of certainty you feel when you put your hand on a hot surface and know, instantly, that you need to pull it away. But then something shifted. The presence I had been aware of at the edges of my consciousness, the one that felt vast and patient and impossibly old, moved closer. And I understood without being told that I was being given a choice. I could stay. I could let go. I could release myself from the life I had been living and move into whatever came next. There would be peace in that, rest, an end to pretending. Or I could go back. But if I went back, I was shown, and this is the part that changed everything. I was shown what going back would require. I was shown that I could not return to my life as it was and survive. Not truly survive. I could exist. I could smile and fulfill my duties and play my role until my body gave out decades from now. But the part of me that was actually me would die slowly, quietly, invisibly. If I wanted to go back and actually live, if I wanted to honor the promise I had made to myself the night before surgery, I would have to do something I had been taught my entire life was impossible. I would have to say no. I would have to choose myself over expectation, truth over image, my voice over the silence I had been trained to keep. And I was shown the cost. I was shown that my family would be devastated, that my father would feel I had disgraced him, that my mother would weep and ask what she had done wrong, that my engagement would end, that there would be scandal, that I would lose things I had always been told were the only things that mattered. But I was also shown something else. I was shown that on the other side of that loss, there was a life I could not yet imagine. A life where I was not a symbol or a decoration, but a person. Whole, complete, free to make mistakes, to fail, to discover who I actually was beneath all the layers of who I had been told to be. And standing in that place, in that silence, in that impossible space between life and death, I made my choice. I chose to go back. Not to the life I had been living, but to the possibility of a different one. The transition back was not gentle. It was violent, like being pulled through a tunnel at a speed that should have torn me apart. I felt cold, so cold, and then burning, and then pain. The kind of pain that has no location because it is everywhere at once. And then I heard voices, shouting, movement, machines. And then I opened my eyes. The first face I saw was my surgeon. He was crying. He told me later that they had been about to call it, that I had been flatlined for 12 hours, that they had tried everything, that my return was... He used the word impossible. He used the word miracle. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital recovering. My family visited every day. My father held my hand and thanked God. My mother brought me flowers. My fiancé came twice, both times with his mother, both times formal and brief. And the entire time I felt like I was watching from a distance, because I knew something they did not know yet. I knew what I was about to do. I waited until I was home, until I was strong enough to sit up without assistance, until we were gathered in the formal sitting room. My parents, my fiancé, his parents, the families brought together to finalize wedding details. And I spoke. I said very quietly that I could not marry him. The room went silent. My father asked me to repeat what I had said. He asked as though he had not heard correctly, as though the words I had spoken were in a language he did not understand. I repeated it, louder this time. I said I could not marry someone I did not love, someone I did not know, someone who did not know me. My fiancé's mother stood up and left the room. My mother started to cry. My father's face went through several expressions very quickly. Confusion, disbelief, anger, something that looked almost like fear. He asked if I had lost my mind during the surgery. I told him I had found it. What followed was not a conversation. It was an intervention, a campaign, a siege. Every member of my family took turns trying to convince me I was making a mistake, that I was confused, that I was traumatized, that I did not understand what I was throwing away. They were right. I was throwing it away. All of it. The security, the approval, the life that had been planned for me since birth. But I had seen the alternative. I had stood in that space between life and death and been shown, with a clarity that nothing in my life had ever given me before, what it would cost to keep pretending. And I could not do it anymore. The engagement was broken. It caused exactly the scandal I had been shown it would cause. My fiancé's family was furious. There were whispers throughout the royal circle. My father did not speak to me for 4 months. But something else happened too. Something I had not expected. My sister Noor came to my room one night, 3 weeks after everything had fallen apart. She sat on my bed and she said very quietly, "I have been engaged for 6 years, and I have never told anyone that I do not want to marry him." And then she started to cry, and I held her while she cried, and I realized that what I had done, what I had chosen, had given her permission to ask herself the same question I had been forced to ask. What do I actually want? What would I choose if I were free to choose? Over the following months, other women came to me. Not many, but enough. Cousins, friends of my sisters. Women I barely knew who had heard the story and who wanted to sit with someone who had said no and survived it. I cannot tell you that everything became easy after that. It did not. My relationship with my father is still strained. There are family gatherings I am not invited to. There are doors that closed when I made my choice. But there are also doors that opened. I went back to university. I am studying literature. I am writing. I have opinions I am allowed to express. I have friendships that are not based on status or family connection, but on actual affinity. I have begun to discover what I like, what I value, what makes me angry, what makes me laugh. I am, for the first time in my life, becoming a person instead of a symbol. And I want to tell you why I am sharing this now. Why I am speaking about something that my family would very much prefer remained private, because I think there are people listening to this who feel the way I felt, trapped inside a life that looks acceptable from the outside, but feels like suffocation from the inside. People who have been told in 1,000 different ways that what they want does not matter as much as what is expected of them. People who have made themselves smaller and quieter and less true because the cost of being honest felt too high. And I want you to know what I learned in those 12 hours. I learned that you do not have to die to realize your life is not your own. But sometimes it takes something that extreme, something that shatters every pretense and every defense, to see clearly enough to change. I learned that the people who love you will not always understand your choices, that choosing yourself does not mean the people you love will celebrate that choice. Some of them will mourn, some of them will be angry, some of them will try with everything they have to pull you back into the shape they need you to be. And I learned that you can love those people and still choose yourself. I learned that freedom is not the absence of consequence. It is the willingness to accept the consequence in exchange for the truth. And I learned that the voice inside you, the one you have been trained to ignore, to suppress, to silence, that voice is not your enemy. It is the only part of you that knows what you are here to do. And ignoring it does not make it go away. It just makes you smaller and smaller, until there is almost nothing left. I died for 12 hours, and in those 12 hours, I was given a gift I did not know I needed. I was shown with absolute clarity what it would cost to keep living a lie, and I was given the choice to come back and live differently. Most people do not get that choice delivered so clearly. Most people do not get 12 hours in a space between worlds where all the pretense falls away and the truth stands naked in front of them. But you do not need to die to make that choice. You can make it right now. You can ask yourself the question I was forced to ask. If I keep living the life I am living, will I reach the end of it and feel that I actually lived? Or will I feel that I performed, that I endured, that I survived? And if the answer frightens you, if the answer is anything other than a wholehearted yes, then you already know what you need to do. I am not saying it will be easy. It was not easy for me. There were nights after I broke my engagement when I lay awake and wondered if I had made a terrible mistake, if I had thrown away stability and security and approval for something I might never actually find. But I will tell you this. I have never once regretted it, because even on the hardest days, even when my father refuses to look at me, even when I hear the whispers, even when I feel the weight of disappointing people I love, I am still more alive than I was in all the years when I was perfect. I do not know what happens after we die. I do not know if what I experienced in those 12 hours was a glimpse of something real, or a construction of my own mind, trying to make sense of trauma. But I know this. I came back different. I came back willing to disappoint people in exchange for honoring myself. I came back understanding that approval is not the same as love. I came back knowing that the life I was supposed to live was never actually mine. And I came back determined to find out who I would be if I stopped trying to be who I was supposed to be. That is what I brought back from those 12 hours. Not a vision of heaven, not a message from God, not proof of anything beyond this world, just the undeniable, unavoidable, life-altering truth that I was living a life I did not choose, and that I was the only person who could change that. So I did. And if you are listening to this and something inside you is responding, if something is stirring or aching or breaking open, I want you to know that you do not need a near-death experience to give yourself permission. You do not need to wait for a crisis. You do not need anyone's approval. You can decide right now that the life you are living is not the life you are keeping, that the person you have been pretending to be is not the person you are staying, that the fear of consequence is not larger than the cost of continuing to betray yourself. I was a princess who had everything except the one thing that mattered, and I had to die to realize that the one thing that mattered was the only thing I had never been given, the freedom to choose. So I chose, and my life is smaller now in some ways, quieter, less secure, but it is mine, completely, undeniably, irrevocably mine. And that is worth more than every title, every palace, every gold thread in every dress I ever wore. I am Princess Amira bint Faisal Al Saud, and for the first time in my life, I am also just Amira, just me, and that is enough.